July 7, 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Dawn broke over the American positions of the U.S. Army 27th Infantry Division. In their defensive positions, Marines and soldiers conducted final checks of their weaponry. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien of the 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, grasped two Colt M1911A1 pistols, each loaded with 7 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition. Their objective was clear: survive the Pacific War's largest banzai charge. At 04:45 hours, the ground vibrated, and then, through the pre-dawn dark, an unforgettable sound emerged for survivors. Thousands of Japanese soldiers screaming as they surged directly into American lines. Imperial Japanese Army officers, their katana swords gleaming, led the assault, followed by successive waves of troops armed with Arisaka rifles featuring fixed bayonets. Among them, officers carried the standard Imperial sidearm, the Type 14 Nambu pistol, chambered for the 8x22mm cartridge. The subsequent events starkly highlighted the differing national philosophies regarding personal combat weapons and illustrated why American forces carried what many considered the most effective military sidearm ever produced. The American Colt M1911A1 had arrived in the Pacific Theater with a reputation already established during World War I. Designed by the renowned firearms engineer John Moses Browning and adopted by the U.S. Army in 1911, this single-action, recoil-operated pistol fired the .45 ACP cartridge, specifically engineered for one primary purpose: stopping power. The .45 ACP propelled a 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second from the service-issue M1911A1 pistol. While its chamber pressure was relatively low at 21,000 psi, its heavy, slower-moving projectile delivered devastating terminal ballistics. The rationale was brutally straightforward. When fired from the M1911A1's 5-inch barrel, the .45 ACP round possessed sufficient momentum to incapacitate a person, regardless of the impact location. The 230-grain bullet, traveling at 830 feet per second, would embed itself upon striking rather than over-penetrating. This characteristic made it exceptionally effective in close-quarters combat, where a single, accurate shot could immediately neutralize a threat.
By 1944, American factories had manufactured 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols for the war effort. Production was distributed among numerous contractors: Colt Firearms, Remington Rand, Ithaca Gun Company, Union Switch and Signal Company, and even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which produced 500 highly sought-after pistols before reallocating its tooling to other manufacturing. This immense output ensured that American forces in the Pacific were amply equipped with dependable sidearms. The U.S. Marine Corps alone increased its authorized pistol allocation from 798 per division in 1942 to 1,777 per division by 1945. This reflected the recognition that Pacific theater combat frequently devolved into close-quarters engagements where rifles and machine guns became cumbersome. Every Marine officer, many NCOs, tank crews, artillery personnel, and specialized units carried the M1911A1 as their primary personal defense weapon. In stark contrast stood the Japanese Type 14 Nambu pistol. Named after Colonel Kajiro Nambu and introduced in 1926 during the 14th year of the Taisho era, this pistol represented Japan's effort to modernize its military sidearms. The Type 14 was a striker-fired semi-automatic pistol with an 8-round magazine capacity and a 4.6-inch barrel. Despite holding one more round than the M1911A1, the Nambu suffered from fundamental design and ammunition limitations. The Type 14 fired the 8x22mm Nambu cartridge, a bottlenecked round that launched a 100-grain bullet at approximately 1,000 feet per second. While this velocity surpassed that of the .45 ACP, the significantly lighter bullet carried far less momentum and stopping power. The 8x22mm Nambu was dimensionally unique. Its bullet diameter of .321 inches and bottlenecked case design meant it shared no commonality with any other military cartridge globally. This isolation complicated logistics and hindered ammunition development.
Japanese military doctrine mandated officers purchase their own sidearms, and the Type 14 was designed to be more affordable than earlier Nambu variants. At 78 yen, it was still costly, representing a substantial portion of an officer's monthly salary, but more accessible than the 180 yen Type B Nambu that preceded it. This economic reality meant that many Japanese officers in the Pacific carried pistols fundamentally inadequate for combat against determined adversaries. The Type 14's design flaws became evident in combat. Its safety mechanism required two hands to operate, one to hold the pistol, the other to manipulate the safety lever positioned above the trigger guard. This made swift weapon readiness impossible under fire or in confined spaces. The magazine release system was problematic. Wet or dirty conditions would cause the magazine to bind, making reloading difficult or impossible. Unlike the M1911A1, the Type 14 lacked a bolt hold-open feature, preventing operators from immediately knowing when the weapon was empty. Most critically, the magazine incorporated a disconnect feature that prevented the pistol from firing if the magazine was removed or lost. While intended as a safety measure, this meant a Type 14 with a damaged or lost magazine became completely useless, unlike the M1911A1, which could still fire a chambered round even with the magazine detached. By 1944, Japan had produced approximately 400,000 Type 14 Nambu pistols since 1926. This number, though substantial, paled in comparison to American production. The United States had manufactured nearly 5 times as many M1911A1 pistols in just the war years alone, demonstrating the vast industrial capacity disparity between the two nations. The morning of July 7, 1944, would provide the ultimate test for these weapon systems. Major McCarthy of the 27th Infantry Division later described the Japanese banzai attack as akin to a cattle stampede from a Western film, only the Japanese continued relentlessly. The attack had been preceded by a night of heavy drinking by Japanese forces, with beer and sake consumed in large quantities as soldiers prepared for what many knew would be their final battle. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien found himself directly in the path of the assault. As Japanese officers led the charge with drawn swords, O'Brien drew both of his M1911A1 pistols and began engaging targets at close range. The .45 ACP rounds proved devastatingly effective against the charging enemy. Each 230-grain bullet that found its mark immediately dropped an attacker, the heavy projectile transferring its full energy into the target. When O'Brien expended the ammunition in both pistols, 14 rounds total, he was severely wounded in the shoulder but continued fighting. Relying on the M1911A1's reputation for reliability, he had absolute confidence that each trigger pull would result in a fired round. The pistol's simple, robust design meant that dirt, blood, and the chaos of combat did not impede its function.
After exhausting his pistol ammunition, O'Brien took control of a Jeep-mounted .50 caliber machine gun and continued his defense. His rearguard action allowed many of his men to retreat and regroup. When the Japanese finally overran his position, at least 30 enemy bodies were found around his final fighting position, many attributed to his accurate pistol fire in the opening moments of the attack.
The story of Private Tom Baker from the same battle illustrates the M1911A1's role as a last resort weapon. When Baker's rifle ammunition ran out, he used the weapon as a club until it shattered against Japanese attackers. Wounded and unable to continue retreating with his unit, Baker was propped against a tree by his comrades. They lit a cigarette for him and placed a loaded M1911A1 in his hands with 8 rounds, 7 in the magazine plus 1 chambered. When Baker's body was discovered after the battle, the M1911A1 lay empty beside him, and 8 Japanese soldiers were dead in a rough circle around his position. Each of the 7 magazine rounds, plus the chambered round, had found a target, demonstrating both the weapon's accuracy and the devastating effect of the .45 ACP cartridge in skilled hands.
These accounts were not isolated incidents. Throughout the Pacific Theater, the M1911A1 proved its worth in countless engagements. During the Guadalcanal Campaign in 1942 to 1943, a moment of intense drama occurred at the division command post when a sword-wielding Japanese officer and 2 riflemen charged directly toward Admiral Richmond K. Turner. Marines armed with M1911A1 pistols engaged the attackers at close range, with the .45 ACP rounds proving capable of stopping determined enemies even when they were in a full charge. The effectiveness of the .45 ACP round was not accidental. The cartridge had been specifically developed in response to American military experience during the Philippine Insurrection from 1899 to 1891. U.S. forces armed with .38 long Colt revolvers had encountered Moro tribesmen who, even when shot multiple times at close range, would continue fighting. The inadequate stopping power of the smaller cartridge led to a military requirement for a minimum .45 caliber handgun round. Following the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904, which examined the effectiveness of various cartridges against both live animals and human cadavers, the U.S. Army determined that nothing less than .45 caliber would provide adequate stopping power. The resulting .45 ACP cartridge, when fired from the M1911A1, could knock the enemy over from any entry point on the body, in contrast to smaller caliber rounds that might wound without immediately incapacitating.
The psychological impact of the .45 ACP was as significant as its physical effect. The large caliber report and visible impact on targets profoundly affected enemy morale. Japanese forces armed with their underpowered Type 14 Nambu pistols quickly learned to respect the distinctive sound of M1911A1 fire. The deep boom of the .45 ACP was unmistakably different from the sharper crack of smaller calibers, and enemy forces learned to associate it with immediate lethality. Japanese military documents captured during the war revealed the enemy's awareness of American firepower superiority. A diary recovered from a Japanese officer on Macon Atoll in November 1943 noted the overwhelming nature of American weapons. The officer wrote, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear of anybody and everyone is high-spirited." But his entries also revealed a clear understanding that Japanese forces were outmatched in terms of equipment and logistics. Individual Japanese soldiers carried equipment loads of 45 kilograms, representing 87% of the average soldier's 52-kilogram body weight. This crushing load, combined with inadequate weapons and declining ammunition supplies, created a force that relied on fanatical determination rather than tactical superiority. The Type 14 Nambu, as the primary officer sidearm, symbolized the broader problems facing Japanese forces, weapons designed in peacetime that proved inadequate for the demands of total war.
The contrast in manufacturing quality became apparent as the war progressed. American M1911A1 production maintained high standards even under wartime pressure. Weapons manufactured by different contractors were interchangeable, with part standardization ensuring that field repairs could be accomplished using components from any manufacturer. The pistols were finished with durable Parkerized coatings instead of bluing, and grips were changed from checkered walnut to brown plastic to expedite production, but mechanical reliability never suffered. Japanese Type 14 production, conversely, showed declining quality as the war progressed.
Late-war pistols, manufactured at the Torimitsu factory, featured ungrooved wooden slab grips to speed production, and overall fit and finish deteriorated as Japan's industrial capacity was strained by Allied bombing and resource shortages. Some late-war Type 14 pistols were date-marked as late as February 1945, indicating production continued even as American forces closed in on the Japanese home islands. The disparity in ammunition logistics was equally telling. The United States produced standard military .45 ACP cartridges in massive quantities with consistent ballistics and quality control. Specialized variants were also developed, including the M12T23 shot cartridge issued in U.S. Army Air Force's survival kits. This round contained 118 pieces of number 7.5 birdshot in a red wax paper projectile, allowing air crews armed with M1911A1 pistols to hunt small game if shot down behind enemy lines. An improved M15 shot cartridge with 108 pieces of birdshot and better weather resistance replaced the earlier round. Japan, meanwhile, struggled to maintain adequate supplies of the unique 8x22mm Nambu ammunition. The cartridge's proprietary dimensions meant it could not be substituted with captured ammunition or simplified using common components. As Japanese supply lines were severed by American submarine and air attacks, Type 14 pistols became increasingly difficult to keep in service.
The effectiveness of American pistol training also contributed to the M1911A1's combat success. U.S. forces received extensive instruction in pistol marksmanship, emphasizing the weapon's role as both a primary tool for officers and NCOs and as a backup weapon when primary arms failed. The M1911A1's single-action trigger provided a crisp, consistent pull that aided accuracy, while the substantial weight of the all-steel construction helped manage recoil from the powerful .45 ACP cartridge. Japanese training, by contrast, emphasized traditional warrior skills, including swordsmanship and bayonet fighting. While these skills could be effective in close combat, they required closing to contact distance, something that became increasingly difficult against American forces equipped with superior firepower. The Type 14 Nambu was often viewed more as a badge of rank than as a practical combat tool, with many officers receiving minimal training in its employment. The M1911A1's reliability under adverse conditions became legendary among Pacific Theater veterans. The pistol functioned in the mud of Guadalcanal, the coral dust of Tarawa, the volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, and a rain-soaked terrain of Okinawa. Its simple, robust design meant that basic field maintenance could keep the weapon operational even under the most challenging circumstances. Stories of M1911A1 reliability were passed down through Marine and Army units. Weapons that had been submerged in salt water, buried in sand, or dropped from aircraft continued to function with minimal maintenance. The loose tolerances that some critics cited as reducing accuracy actually contributed to the pistol's ability to operate when fouled with debris, a crucial advantage in Pacific combat conditions.
The Type 14 Nambu's magazine problems became notorious among those who encountered them. The combination of tight tolerances and the magazine disconnect feature meant that weapons exposed to sand, mud, or salt water often became completely inoperative. Unlike the M1911A1, which could be quickly field-stripped and cleaned with minimal tools, the Type 14 required more complex maintenance procedures that were difficult to perform under combat conditions. By late 1944, as American forces prepared for the assault on the Japanese home islands, the disparity in small arms effectiveness had become unmistakable. American units carried M1911A1 pistols that had been refined through years of Pacific combat experience. Modifications based on battlefield feedback had improved reliability and ergonomics, while manufacturing quality remained consistently high despite massive production volumes. Japanese forces, meanwhile, faced critical shortages of ammunition, spare parts, and even basic weapons. Many late-war units were equipped with a mixture of captured weapons, obsolete systems, and hastily produced equipment of declining quality. The Type 14 Nambu, despite its 18-year service life, had never evolved to meet the demands of modern warfare.
The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 provided the final, bloodiest test of these weapon systems. During 82 days of brutal fighting, American forces faced the most fanatical resistance of the Pacific War. Japanese defenders, knowing that Okinawa represented the last major barrier before the home islands, fought with desperate determination. American forces lost more than 12,000 killed and 36,000 wounded taking Okinawa, but Japanese losses were catastrophic. 70,000 military dead, plus between 100,000 and 150,000 civilian casualties. The disparity in effectiveness between American and Japanese small arms played a crucial role in this outcome. U.S. Marines and soldiers armed with M1911A1 pistols could engage and neutralize threats at close range with confidence in their weapons' effectiveness. The M1911A1's psychological impact on Japanese forces cannot be understated. Documented interviews with Japanese soldiers and post-war memoirs revealed that Japanese soldiers had developed a profound respect for American firepower, particularly the devastating effect of .45 caliber weapons. The distinctive sound of M1911A1 fire became associated with immediate lethality, affecting enemy morale and tactical decision-making. As American forces prepared for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan scheduled for November 1945, planners recognized that urban combat on the home islands would necessitate extensive use of sidearms. The M1911A1's proven effectiveness in close-quarters fighting made it an essential tool for the anticipated street-to-street battles in Japanese cities.
The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before Operation Downfall could be launched. But the M1911A1's reputation had been permanently established. The pistol that had served American forces from the trenches of France to the beaches of the Pacific had proven its worth in the most demanding combat conditions. Post-war analysis revealed the full extent of the disparity between American and Japanese small arms production. The United States had manufactured nearly 2 million M1911A1 pistols during the war years, while Japan's total Type 14 production over nearly 2 decades barely exceeded 400,000 units. This 5-to-1 production advantage reflected broader industrial capabilities that ultimately determined the war's outcome.
The effectiveness of the .45 ACP cartridge in Pacific combat led to its continued use by American Special Operations Forces long after the M1911A1 was replaced as the standard military sidearm. The round's proven stopping power made it irreplaceable for close-quarters combat situations where immediate threat neutralization was essential. Japanese weapons, including the Type 14 Nambu, became highly sought-after war trophies among American servicemen. The pistol's distinctive appearance and association with enemy officers made it a prized souvenir despite its inferior combat performance. Many American veterans brought Type 14 pistols home as mementos of their Pacific service, often not realizing that they had carried far superior weapons throughout the war. The contrast between the M1911A1 and Type 14 Nambu represented more than just different approaches to sidearm design. It reflected fundamental differences in industrial capacity, tactical doctrine, and understanding of modern warfare. The American pistol was the product of a systematic approach to weapons development, incorporating lessons learned from previous conflicts and backed by massive industrial production capabilities. The Type 14 Nambu, while representing significant advancement over earlier Japanese sidearms, suffered from the limitations of a nation that had entered the industrial age relatively recently and lacked the resources for extensive weapons development and testing. The pistol's problems were symptomatic of broader Japanese military challenges: inadequate logistics, declining production quality, and a doctrine that emphasized fighting spirit over technological superiority.
For American forces in the Pacific, the M1911A1 provided not just a reliable weapon, but also confidence in their equipment superiority. The knowledge that their sidearms could stop any threat with a single well-placed shot affected tactical decision-making and personal morale. In the life-or-death situations that characterized Pacific combat, this confidence could mean the difference between survival and death. The legacy of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat extends far beyond its mechanical specifications or production numbers. The pistol became a symbol of American industrial might and tactical professionalism. Its effectiveness against Japanese forces armed with inferior weapons demonstrated the importance of technological superiority in modern warfare. The stories of men like Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien and Private Tom Baker, who used their M1911A1 pistols to deadly effect in their final moments, became part of American military legend. These accounts, verified by after-action reports and witness testimony, showed that proper weapons in skilled hands could achieve results far beyond what mere statistics might suggest. The .45 ACP cartridge fired from M1911A1 pistols had stopped banzai charges, eliminated infiltrators, and provided American forces with a reliable last line of defense when all else failed. In the brutal close-quarters combat that characterized much of the Pacific War, the stopping power and reliability of the American pistol proved decisive. Japanese forces, despite their courage and determination, found themselves consistently outmatched, not just in overall firepower, but in the fundamental effectiveness of their personal weapons. The Type 14 Nambu, chambered for an underpowered cartridge and suffering from design flaws that became critical under combat conditions, could not compete with American weapons that had been designed specifically for maximum combat effectiveness.
The mathematical reality was inescapable. A 230-grain bullet traveling at 830 feet per second carried far more momentum and stopping power than a 100-grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second. When multiplied across millions of combat encounters throughout the Pacific theater, this ballistic advantage translated into tactical superiority that helped determine the war's outcome. The M1911A1's success in Pacific combat validated John Moses Browning's original design and the U.S. military's decision to adopt the .45 ACP cartridge. The weapon system proved that careful engineering, adequate testing, and massive production could create small arms that provided decisive advantages on the battlefield. For Japan, the Type 14 Nambu's limitations represented a broader challenge: the difficulty of competing against an industrial and technological superpower while lacking the resources for comprehensive military modernization. The pistol's problems were microcosm of Japan's overall strategic situation, forced to rely on fighting spirit and tactical innovation to compensate for material disadvantages. The Pacific War demonstrated that in modern warfare, the quality and quantity of equipment could overcome even the most determined opposition. American forces, armed with superior weapons like the M1911A1 and backed by massive industrial production, gradually wore down Japanese resistance through sheer material superiority. The effectiveness of the .45 ACP round in Pacific combat influenced American military thinking for decades. Even after the M1911A1 was replaced by the Beretta M9 in 1985, special operations units continued to use .45 caliber pistols for situations requiring maximum stopping power. The lessons learned in Pacific combat about the importance of immediately neutralizing threats continued to shape American small arms development. The contrast between American and Japanese sidearms in the Pacific theater ultimately tells a larger story about industrial warfare in the 20th century.
Nations that could design, produce, and field superior equipment in massive quantities held decisive advantages over those that could not. The M1911A1 versus Type 14 Nambu comparison illustrates this principle at the most personal level, in the hands of individual soldiers fighting for their lives. The success of the M1911A1 in Pacific combat secured its place in American military history and popular culture. The pistol became synonymous with American fighting effectiveness, reliability under pressure, and the triumph of superior engineering over inferior alternatives. Its performance against Japanese forces armed with Type 14 Nambu pistols demonstrated conclusively that in matters of life and death, equipment quality could determine outcomes. The mathematical precision of the 45 ACP's ballistics, 230 grains at 830 feet per second, translated into battlefield effectiveness that Japanese forces could not match with their 100-grain bullets at 1,000 feet per second. This difference, multiplied across thousands of combat encounters, helped secure American victory in the Pacific theater and established the M1911A1 as one of the most successful military sidearms in history.